Michael couldn't communicate with me on the telephone because anybody that calls out on the prison system is recorded. So then, at that time when I'd finally dated in to see Michael, he said that on March the 20th, 2001, FBI agent Keith Kutry from the Williamsport, Pennsylvania resident agency, Mike was at White Deer, Pennsylvania, which is right down the road from Williamsport, came in to see him as a result of his attorney in Chicago, Lou Buffardi, writing to Colin Powell. Michael couldn't get the Bureau of Prisons to cooperate to get the FBI in or anybody in to talk about what he had, the information he had about terrorist activity forthcoming in the United States. Couldn't get anybody in the Bureau of Prisons, couldn't get anybody in the system. Tried to contact the FBI. Everybody ignored him. But his attorney in Chicago wrote to Colin Powell. Powell apparently contacted the FBI and said, go see him. I don't think there's any question about it. Michael never would have talked to the FBI if it had been that letter to Colin Powell. So Keith Kutry comes into Michael, and at that time, March the 20th, 2001, 6 months prior to 9/11, Michael tells him who was coordinating forthcoming terrorist attacks in the United States, an electrical engineer out of Paterson, New Jersey, by the way, who has since gone back to Egypt, who had furnished information on the movement of Soviet-made shoulder-fired missiles in the United States. And we had 37 of these shoulder-fired missiles that came in through Canada. There was a 30-hour window when the FBI could have grabbed them after Keith Kutry interviewed Michael. They didn't. These shoulder-fired missiles have now been dispersed, brought in by 4 private airplanes, and they're scattered someplace in our country in hiding. Michael furnished him information about who was coordinating forthcoming skyjackings, who was coordinating bombings and espionage, and that he had informants who knew the identity of sleepers in the United States and overseas. You know what a sleeper is, folks? Anybody who doesn't know what a sleeper is? Okay, well, sleepers is somebody, they train you to be an espionage agent or a terrorist, and they say, go home and relax, we'll call on you when we're ready. And then they give you a call or you meet with them, and they say, okay, go out and blow this guy away or whatever the situation might be. And Michael also gave Agent Kutry information on the false identification ring in Montreal, Canada, and in New Jersey, and also the exact false IDs of 30 terrorists who had been chosen for action in the United States. Now, you remember the number 19? You remember the number 20? Right? There were 20, right? One of them was arrested on the 4 airplanes, right? Okay. There were 2 other planes that were to have been skyjacked. Those other 2 planes were supposed to go for the Statue of Liberty and for the Senate building, the Capitol building. And so there were supposed to have been 6 planes hijacked. But as you recall, after 9/11, FAA grounded immediately all the planes. And there was a plane in, I don't know where it was, I think New Jersey or New York. When everybody got off, they found box cutters under the seat. So Michael thought he had, in addition to this, furnished the exact ID of 30 terrorists, which would handle the 6 airplanes. He had an informant among the terrorists who was preparing false IDs for 4,500 terrorists around the world. 9/11 occurred. Mike thought he had done his job. Before that, when it occurred, he was shocked. 2 days later, FBI agent Keith Kutry, an attorney in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, interviewed this particular individual, Mike's informant that he furnished to them, threatened him with prosecution, and deported him and his family. Michael tells me he's learned since then that the whole family's been executed. So when Kutry came back to talk to Michael 2 days after 9/11, September 13th, Michael told me this. He was so excited and so upset, he was spitting at him and talking to him. He was so incensed over it. Kutry wanted to know why Michael was bothering the FBI and wasting its time, accused Michael of seeking publicity, accused Michael of being an anti-FBI and anti-government, accused Michael, called him a conspiracy theorist, called him a know-it-all, a hoaxer, and threatened him with prosecution. At that point, Michael said, that's enough. I'm not going to talk anymore unless you allow me to have an attorney with me. So there you have 911. Now you're saying to me, all right, Ted, anybody can say that Michael had this information. I have in front of me right here, certified stamp from Michael Riconosciuto to Don Bailey, former congressman, U.S. congressman, no longer in office, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I have here in front of me a letter that went with that certified stamp dated February 6th. The letter's dated February 5, 2001. And in this letter, it's written in longhand, Michael says to Bailey, things have now come to a head. I now have contact with an operative that is an Arab group known as the Base, that's Al-Qaeda. They are presently engaged in preparation for a major attack in the United States. We have an insider to this group that handles false IDs and passports for the group's operation. I also have contact with one of my parties that supplies explosive materials to the group, so on and so forth. Last page of the letter. As soon as we learned that an actual attack was in the works, we realized we can't fool around with this. On the other hand, we don't want to get screwed by the government. That's the understatement of the day, of course. They're good at screwing us. So Michael gives me this information. January 3rd, 4th, and 5th, spent 3 days with him, 3 whole days with him. I wrote up this report. This report's available to you, by the way, through my website, tedgunderson.com. And what do? I go to Washington, D.C. Take this report. I spend 3 weeks in Washington, D.C. That was not an inexpensive trip, by the way. You ever stay in Washington for 3 weeks, you're in trouble if you don't have a few bucks. I didn't have the money, so I slept at on top of some cardboard, not cardboard, but plywood on top of some the upside-down plastic mail containers with a makeshift mattress there. I slept on that in the American Free Press office, by the way, for 3 weeks. And I passed out my report to more than 150 congressmen and senators. I have in front of me right now a letter to Mr. Lee Hamilton, dated January 29, 2003. Michael, what I did is I referenced my interviews with Michael January 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And I told him who Michael was in this letter without going in a lot of detail. And I told him the information he had. I gave Lee Hamilton, co-chairman of the President's Commission to investigate 911. I gave Hamilton my report, in addition to passing it out to 155 congressmen and senators, and asked the committee to debrief Michael as soon as possible. The last I heard from the President's Commission, Michael was never debriefed, and nothing ever came of that. There's no mention of that in the President's, in the President's Commission to investigate 911 report. Here's a list of people and agencies that I gave my report to. I gave it to the 3 sisters. You know who the 3 sisters are? Washington Post, New York Times, LA Times. And of course, nothing ever came of that. You remember this girl, this FBI attorney in Minneapolis, who came forward with a memo, and they chastised her, and she was demoted, and I don't know what all happened to her. Told her to keep her mouth shut. Appeared in Time magazine. Well, I looked up the Associated Press reporter who took that information and reported it. And I called him on the phone, specifically. And I told him I had this information. I sent him a copy of my report. 2 weeks later, I called him. I said, "Are you going to report it or not?" He said, "No, not." I said, "Why not?" He said, "It's too hot. It's too hot." Here's some of the agencies: Drug Enforcement, FBI, BATF, Secret Service, LAPD, San Bernardino Sheriff's Office, National Terrorist Hotline, and all the congressmen and so forth. Associated Press, Philippines Consulate. I gave it to everybody and his brother. British Consulate Division, Scotland Yard. I gave it to everybody. Nothing ever came of it.